Hello to everybody that's here and ready for us, and welcome to the 8th ILC Home webinar based on how we help each other through the challenge. So far, for those of you that have tuned in to most of them, we've taken the early thoughts of people some 8 weeks ago. We've looked at how suppliers can survive. We've taken a look at our employees' well-being. We looked at the survival of some building suppliers. We then took a really good look at how video technology could be used. And then last week, we had a very interesting discussion on how the future, how things might affect the future and things that might change. However, this week it seems to have changed a little bit. We're now in day 50, and it seems to be moving into a different phase. And if you read the ILC news, which comes out once or twice a week, please, if you aren't in receipt of that, please contact me and Alan at alavclaims.com, and I'll get you on the list. But we're moving to a different phase, at least in parts of the country, as Sean might tell us later. So following the government's announcement, at least in England, then we're thinking to get more and more people back to work. So now we've moved today on to building claims restarting. And how ready are we all? How ready are insurers? How ready are suppliers? We can look at the next steps. We can take a look at some of the capacity against requirements. COVID-19 has brought in new building working methods, which we all have to be aware of. And of course, that probably has a cost implication on it. We've got to look at workflow. We've got to look at financing and cash flow and the availability of materials and how that's moving forward. So as we begin the long road back, I'm delighted we've been joined by 4 panelists today. Will Sherwin is a senior category head at the Direct Line Group, and Will, of course, has talked at our conference before. Sean Murphy of Dale Maintenance, Nick Brown of Beta Cove, and as a specialist, Neil Stothart who's the MD of RSK Raw, who you recall will be able to compare some things because he was in our very, very first podcast. I've received some questions. You can ask questions at the bottom of the screen. You will see the ability to chat. Please do so. Anybody else with any queries, again, email me on alan@iloveclaims.com. I will be keeping an eye on that. So I guess the last thing to say is there is no right or wrong in what we're about to hear. It's all our opinions, helping each other through a situation that we've never been through before, and through the coming weeks of beginning to return to work, which again is a completely new journey for insurers and suppliers altogether. So I guess let's start with Will. At the moment, Will, in your view, where sort of are we in beginning to get this restarted, and what do you think might be the next steps? There may be various next steps open to us, but what do you think might be about to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an ever-changing picture almost, with new guidelines released almost on a weekly basis that we're trying to, I guess, react to ourselves as an insurance company, but also with our partners out in the supply chain. I think, where we are at the moment is we've seen a period of time, particularly in the building space, where a number of claims have been deferred, and that's, to protect the individuals that are carrying out the work, but also the customers as well. So we've had a sizable amount of WIP that has been proactively worked in that time frame to reduce it as much as possible, which has been very positive. But it is there, and we're now hearing messages and encouragement to return to work. That will translate very quickly into customer demands. Customers have waited quite patiently, understanding what the current set of circumstances are. But now they see things being eased and certain industries being asked to return. They will want to pick up where they left off from a claims point of view, and they will want to have their repair works completed and get them back to normal life as quickly as possible. So very quickly, we're shifting into what does sensible WIP management look like? How do we prioritize customers based on their circumstances at this point in time? And ultimately, how do we help the supply chain through a period of time that they have suffered from low volumes, but now we're asking them to stand back up very quickly and return to almost peak demand. So it's going to be complicated.
I think that's a very, very good summary of it. Hey, Nick, what about you from your angle? What do you see as where we roughly are and what the next steps might be?
I think it's around, obviously, as Will said, it's contacting your customers, keeping them updated, seeing it's prioritising the customers that are vulnerable or in need. And again, balancing, we've certainly seen the upturn in people now starting to come in and say, look, I would like my works booked in now. We've been sort of like in a holding pattern for getting on nearly 7 or 8 weeks. So we've kept sort of moving dates back and speaking to customers every 14 days. But there's still a lot of customers that still aren't that confident. I think because some of the guidance, dare I say, from the government has been a little bit confusing. There's still sort of reluctance in some sectors to let you back in their home, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges to suppliers is customer confidence to let us back in. I think we're all used to now, doing RAMs, PPE, social distancing, and all the stuff that we need to do in properties. But if a customer won't let us in, then we can't do the work. But I agree with Will. There's gonna be a point where it's suddenly gonna flip between what I think has been actually most customers have been fantastically understanding. I don't think we've had one customer that has moaned about being put on hold or having to wait. But that will soon change to customers wanting you there now, and that's going to be quite a challenge to deal with.
Thanks, Nick. Sean, like your view on that as well, but you've got a slightly, I don't know, have you got a slightly awkward position where you straddle the border also and work between Wales and England, where there appears to be slightly different practices at the moment in your ability to work?
Yeah, that's right, Alan. You're in Wales, we're the same as Scotland and Northern Ireland, in as much as we've got a involved government. And basically in Wales at the moment, we're in the same position as we were 3 weeks ago. Our advice that we are being told to follow is not to stay alert, it's to stay at home. Obviously, our customers were over the border, and we do a lot of work in Bristol, Bath, Gloucester, and down on southwest. They're expecting us to be there now and sort of get into their properties and start working, but we're under Welsh Assembly guidelines. So yeah, it's a tricky one, to be honest with
you. Okay. Neil, you were on the very first podcast 7 or 8 weeks ago. In terms of your view about what might change and where we've got to now, what do you see as the difference? Are you where you expected to be as we begin to return to work, or do you have more concerns, or are you more optimistic?
I mean, you try and be optimistic during the moment, but I mean, it's difficult planning for anything when so many people are uncertain. We knew we weren't going to, our work wasn't going to drop off completely, and that's proven to be the case. We can, although similar to what the others said, we work nationally, so in the devolved governments, it's been horrendous trying to keep on top of what you can do where. And yeah, I mean, I think Nick mentioned about mixed messages coming out. Well, I think that the media really hasn't helped either, because even some of the adjusters and insurers have sort of relied on what they get from the media, and it's been quite difficult to sort of figure your way out through that. But we have been able to keep going, particularly in England. A lot of our works, as well, you could say, are essential because you're trying to prevent the oil. In most cases, it is to do with heating oil. So you're trying to prevent the heating oil migrating further, impacting someone else's property or watercourses. So in that regard, we're about where we thought we would be. We're probably running at about half, I suppose, at the moment. And we knew because of that we'd have to furlough staff. And I think we're exactly where we thought we'd be now. It's how many people do you start unfurloughing to bring back to actually be able to begin the works again. But that's primarily in England. But most of our work is because of the volume of numbers of people would be in England. And it's like the others have said, it's that planning now for going back to working in people's homes. We've been quite fortunate because we've had a lot of vans which you can share around. So you can have one person, one van. We haven't been doubling up in vans. It's all been quite straightforward. When the volumes start increasing, that's when it's going to get more difficult, because then you get into, well, normally you'd be sharing the vans. And even one of the reasons I came to the office today was to start to think about when the time comes for coming back, how are we going to start using offices? And, you've got pinch points. So most of offices are quite small. You've got single staircases. How do you pass people in the stairs if you're going to try and keep 2 meters? It's funny little things like that which start happening. And it's the same with trying to keep 2 meters spacing if you're going to be working in someone's home. So we're going to be needing a lot more PPE than, which is, we try to avoid, although we deal with contaminants and volatiles in people's homes, we try to avoid using sort of masks and things because it's a bit scary for people in their homes, but clearly that's going to become the norm, which is quite
and of course, that all these rules have to apply for people living in their home while you're working there as well. Well, I guess before we even look at some of the stuff, the hard job that we've all got to do is try and anticipate what the workload is going to be, so as we can and calculate what our capacity might be to meet the demand as the work begins to flow through. If it comes slowly, we might be able to manage well, but if people all of a sudden say, right, I want everything dealt with now, I guess it's very difficult to really understand what capacity is available to you just now, given all the confusion, financing and other issues that face your suppliers.
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost an impossible equation. I know Neil mentioned there around the use of furlough as well, which is complicated in the sense that people are going to find it quite hard to predict what their throughput will be over the coming weeks and months, and therefore what percentages of their staff that they have put on furlough they need to bring back to be able to meet the capacity. I think that's kind of one part to it. I think obviously as an insurer, we've done a lot of thinking across the different product areas around how we expect that return to come. And there are areas outside of home that we think that will be more immediate, more pronounced quite quickly as people step into their cars and travel more. I think what we're anticipating from a home point of view is a slower return to volume from a building standpoint, driven mainly by the fact that whilst we are releasing certain restrictions across the UK population, the reality is that households will tend to be more full of people than they were previously. So that will change over time, but we do anticipate it to be gradual. I'm perfectly willing to be proven wrong on that, but I think it's quite useful in the context of, whilst we are seeing some progression on the WIP that has built over the time frame that we've been in the most, I guess, restrictive lockdown, the hope is that the new claims volume won't suddenly burst and make it a very complicated picture. So we need to focus on priority number one, WIP, and making sure that new instructions are being handled, but that new instruction volume will increase gradually over time, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Nick, how are you as a contractor going to be able to deal with this? Because I don't know what percentage of people, if you mentioned earlier, you've gotten furlough. How do you bring them back? How are you going to be? What kind of information would you look for to be able to know the capacity that you would be able to meet? I think you're on.
Sorry. We all had a caseload that we put on hold. We have been able to carry on working to some extent, mainly on emergencies or unoccupied properties, sort of larger losses. But certainly volume-wise, the volume of work has dropped dramatically over the past few weeks that we can work on, understandably. Priority obviously is to try and get the jobs that we put on hold, because people will have their works already started halfway through, quarter of the way through, and get those back on track. We've got quite a few elderly customers as well. So you've still got the question of people that are self-shielding till early June. So that doesn't really come into play until now, until then. It's really hard to say, Alan, because I think, as you said, the rules change daily. And it's just around managing that work, getting materials, if we can get the materials, planned ahead, getting provisional dates in and moving with the changes, but at all times keeping the customers updated and informed at all time. It's hard to say, but it's trying to be prepared to bring the customer's work back into being on site as and when it suits the customer, and as and when we can get materials, which is still a challenge as well.
Right. Even I did that. I will come back to materials, and I will also come back to priorities and what we've done to, because I think that's another consideration. Sean, where are you in capacity, and how quickly can you gain go back to your normal capacity, or do you think you're ever going to be able to achieve that in the short term?
I mean, in terms of resources that we've got available to us, Alan?
Yeah, the capacity that you have to go and do the work in whatever, you know, if it's steady in the way that Will hopes it's going to be, and you know, with some calculation, I think is possibly right. But none of us know. But on the other hand, if he is proved wrong, which I hope he isn't, and all of a sudden it comes as a flood, how easily would that be able to be dealt with?
I'm not sure whether we're in a different scenario to a lot of other contractors, certainly in South Wales, where we are in between Caerphilly and Cardiff. Got hit really badly during Storm Dennis, and there were a lot of flood claims in our sort of neighbouring vicinity. We took on a lot of the flood claims, so we were in a surge prior to the COVID lockdown. So a lot of them jobs obviously just went on hold, really. So we've managed to sort of bring people back in and start to work on those customers who are in void properties, etc. So we've always had a group of tradesmen who are available to us. Whilst a lot of our guys have been furloughed, we still have managed to keep a lot of our guys employed. But obviously we're coming to that point now where things like we're running out of plaster, we can't get plaster, and we don't know when that's going to come in, which we'll talk about later on, no doubt. But in terms of resourcing, I've just got a bit of a concern that we don't know whether insurers are stockpiling these claims or are they cash settling. You know, on day one, when the insurers start giving these works out, are they going to hit us with 300 claims that we didn't even know we had? You know, because as Nick alluded to earlier, our new claims intake is obviously dramatically decreased. What is happening with them claims? Has somebody got them in a pot with our name against them for one day, they're just going to hit us with that amount of claims? That's the unaccountable thing that I don't think we can plan for. So it would just be, it was interesting to hear Will's take on that earlier, actually.
Well, and I think we'll come back to that, but of course, with lots of people being at home, perhaps the volume of claims and certainly the type of claims has probably changed quite substantially. So that can have effect on how much of it would eventually find its way through to the supply chain. Back quickly, Neil, on that subject, you know, we can look at the capacity that's required, but as in an environmental and oil sort of angle from yourself, does that mean that the stuff that is being worked on or has previously looked kind of needs to have another look because the situation might have changed, some of the environmental damage might have changed, the oil might have done more damage, because we have been let off for 2.5 months, even slightly before the first lockdown.
Yeah, that is going to be a problem. I mean, there's generally we want works done as quickly as possible, or certainly the first part of the works, just to sort of stop the problem getting worse. In many cases, we have been able to do that, but there are a few, particularly if you're looking at somewhere like Scotland, where we just, and unless it's an absolute essential, so people's health is immediately at risk, we haven't been able to go and do anything. We spoke about digital work before, and that has been quite useful to us because we have been able to share video footage of what the damage is, but it's not like a fire and flood with oil. It's unforeseen. It's sometimes in the actual fabric of the building, and nobody knows until it gets worse and worse. So that's why we need to get in there quickly. So unfortunately, from an insurer's point of view, some of these jobs will be bigger now than they would have been 2 months ago. And there's some, of course, we've already given estimates on. So we've got an idea of what the cleanup is going to be. It probably is going to be different. And there's, you know, and there's bound to be some sort of contentious views then on what we say is now going to be more that we're going to be told, of course you'd say that, but it's, you know, the oil doesn't stop moving. It wicks up brickwork, plasterboard. You know, it could be more in watercourses than than it would have been a couple of months ago. So yes, it is a problem.
Okay, thanks for that. That brings me on to like moving towards two other things, I guess, in the impact on cost and what's going to be, I think, challenging for insurers. Well, I think there are two things there. First of all, when we go back onto sites that we may have been working on, or even ones that were scheduled a while ago, there may be differences and changes that have occurred. And then secondly, in the same subject, COVID-19 has brought around some new safe building practices that some people have alluded to, and certainly quite a lot of the questioners have, you know, about travelling, about the amount of people able to work together, about material availability and supplies. So there are going to be cost implications. How difficult is that making it for insurers to accommodate all these things?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the amount of times that unprecedented has been used over the last few months or so, I think it gives you an indication of how new this is and how, I suppose, we're having to react to a different set of circumstances. I think, there's a number of things in there. There's I think, still a lack of clarity around PPE and general sanitisation requirements, and I think, you know, we probably are going to have to fly with some ambiguity on that. I'm not sure that we will get absolute clarity over what the requirement is in each of the areas of the supply chain that support our business and our customers. I think there is going to be some natural market forces that play a part in here. So we've talked a little bit around shortages of materials within the building space. I mean, it's something we recognise. And I think the social distancing is actually going to drive some, in fairness to the supply chain, is going to drive some labour inefficiency, because you're not able to double up or triple up on trades in a house. It's going to be difficult to actually maintain that social distance for your own workforce, but also for the customer who may well be in the home at the same time. So it's going to be complicated. I think the reality is that a lot of this will be judged on a case-by-case basis, which is not normally what you want to do, if I'm honest, because you want to, you want to have your procedures, your protocols that you follow, and everybody knows what they're doing. But there are going to be things that are unforeseen. There are going to be changes that have happened during a period where no activity has taken place on a claim. And then you've got all of the kind of the current situation, the restrictions that provides on top of it. So I suppose the only answer I've really got is that we have to work quite closely as an insurer with our customers to make sure that they're communicated with, we understand what their expectations are, and we manage them. And we work with our partners out in the supply chain similarly, to ensure that we're doing the best thing that we can do for all of the parties that are involved. Because frankly, we've got to find a way to come out of the other side of this. Otherwise, we've got nothing to work for collectively.
Interestingly, well, I've had a couple of questions, and we know that yourself, Laura Lazarus, Will Cabell, Ian Marsh, all the people insurers we've talked to here, really busting a gut to accommodate these things, and I think that's fantastic. But some of the problems we've got here is that I've had one email from somebody saying that a loss adjuster says they've got an individual loss adjuster has said we've got to stick to what we've got, and we've just had a question now saying, are people prepared to move the rates and the contracts around a little bit to accommodate it? I guess what you're saying is, yeah, we've got to be flexible while still maintaining control as an insurer.
Yeah, I mean, you would expect that I have to protect, in the role that I do for Direct Line Group, I have to protect shareholder value. I have to protect, the business value generally. I have to make sure that the customers are looked after. But I am very minded to make sure that we've got a sustainable supply chain to support the claims process now, but into the long-term future as well. I think, the message from me that I've given to various people that I've spoken to is that it has to feel proportionate, it has to feel justified, but ultimately, if we're in a set of circumstances that mean that there are additional and exceptional costs that need to be, I suppose, included within that claims profile, then that's a conversation we're absolutely willing to have.
Thanks, Rob. And I think, again, those of you at the conference last year will recall us saying that, while we quite rightly expect insurers to understand suppliers' position during these processes, equally suppliers have to understand where the insurers are coming from and how they must protect longevity and things as well. So that's a very, very useful insight from Will. Nick, where are you, do you think, on what's going to happen with cost and the impact of COVID-19 building practices and possibly supplier costs, building material supplies costs are going to have an effect in your business?
Certainly in regard to working practices, if you look at the guidelines, we've mentioned around social distancing, so it's not mixing teams, it's trying to have the same people working on site basically for the duration of the job, so you don't try and mix in too many numbers into a property. Even down to like loan travel to and from the site. It's a bit different from us, from sort of normal building site operations where you've got a fixed site with probably a fixed number of workers on like a large site. We've all got small sites all over our regions that we cover. We've said about the pressure of families being at home more, children being off of school. I know it's still a bit unsure about if and when schools will reopen, but there's the pressure that they've got all their kids home as well. But in terms of cost, I mean, I'm hoping we can cap it at sort of below 20%, but you could look at it, it's going to cost you around 20% to carry out its PPE. As I say, it's organising the labour, it's getting materials, which Sean alluded to. Plaster is the mega hot topic at the moment. We've tried to combat that by going to, it's even worth looking at sort of like damp proofing suppliers that do sell plaster products. It's trying to look at different ways, but we're all hoping and praying that British Gypsum get back to work. But I believe that's going to take 4 to 6 weeks for product to get back into the market. And they've been saying they're being reopening for weeks. So, and with any situation like this, you have got people jumping on the bandwagon of raising prices of materials because of demand. So costs will definitely increase. But as Will alluded to, I think the insurers have been very, very supportive over the past 8 weeks. I've been in the industry. I've worked for Beta Cove now for 28 years, and I haven't, although we have good partnerships with insurers, they really have looked at what the pressures are within the supply chain, and the majority of them have really reacted to it. And then on top of that, we said about how do we manage customers? It's keeping that customer informed and being open and honest with them. If we make them understand that obviously they've been through this with us, that there is going to be a wait, and it's managed around vulnerability and everything else. So long as we talk to our customers, yes, you're going to get the odd one or two that won't accept it, but I hope that the British public will remain as understanding as they have been, and I will use unprecedented again, in unprecedented times.
I think that's fair comment, Nick. Sean, so from your angle, have you been beginning to talk to some of your clients about the increased cost implications of COVID-19, and what kind of reception are you getting?
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. We've been remaining in regular dialogue with them, and following the release of the guidance for employers, employees, and self-employed, which the government released on Monday. If you were to look through that, there's going to be a heck of a lot of hidden costs that we've touched on, but I only think we've scratched the surface on, if I'm being honest. The common thing is PPE and the costs of that. Well, Nick has alluded to the cost of only sending one man per van. So if you've got a job in deepest, darkest West Wales, as lovely a place it is, and normally you'd send 2 men in one van. Now we've got no option. We've got to be sending 2 vans down there, because to keep in line with the social distancing, etc. And that coupled with the fact that I don't know at this time of moment how customers are going to react to when we're in their houses as well. Are they going to be happy with us using their facilities? Are they going to be happy for us using their bathrooms? Because in the guidelines it says we should have hot running water on every job now. So after this pandemic, we don't know whether customers are going to say, sorry, Mr. Builder, but we don't really want to use in our facilities. We've only got one bathroom. We want to keep it as clean as we can. So one of the hidden costs is, do we need, and I hope it doesn't go that way, do we need to look at putting welfare on even the smallest of jobs maybe moving forward? And if the customer insists we don't use their facilities, then that's going to be something that the insurers are going to have to bear in mind.
Okay. From your angle, Neil, what are the biggest challenges you've got in trying to get up and running as any form of volume begins to come through?
It's similar to the others, but one thing we haven't spoken about as well is, although we've got a good distribution of staff around the country, you have specialisms in particular areas. So we do make use of hotels a lot, and that's just not possible at the moment. Well, there's one or two, but it's not going to be reliable. And as the construction industry gets back up to speed, it's going to become more and more difficult. So just having people in the right place at the right time is going to get more problematic. And even, most people on site, they'll pop off for 20 minutes at lunch maybe to go and buy a sandwich. But you can't do that at the moment. So it's that additional, like the others have said, it's all that additional planning until you start working closer to full capacity again. You realise it's really difficult. It's going to be really difficult, and it's going to go on for months. I don't think the customer is going to be the biggest issue, actually. I think because lockdown to a greater or less degree is going to continue for months. I think they're probably going to be reasonably on our side. I think it's the actual mechanics and the costs of making it work that's going to be the bigger problem.
I guess this is an awkward equation also for the insurers. Well, in that we've now got, as you recognise very, very quickly, the implications of the additional cost to deal with it. But then we've also got the return to work and the cash flow and deciding that. How easy do you think it's going to be for insurers to ease the financial burden that is obviously going to be placed in suppliers over this very unsure time of going from having furloughed staff or having low volume capacity to trying to increase it to accommodate what the insurers are going to need?
Yeah, I guess there's probably two parts to that, Alan. So I think the first part is around the total cost of the claim. So, if you take into account that the building repair element of a claim is going to be part of a whole, and there will be associated alternative accommodation costs, just to name another one, we actually need to be, as an insurer, we need to be thinking about the total cost of the claim. And if there are steps that we can take to manage the total cost of the claim, that means perhaps proportionally we're spending a little bit more elsewhere, then that's a sensible thing to do from an overall indemnity standpoint. I think just in relation to, I suppose, the financial support side of it, I guess the way that we've been thinking about that is that the government has I think very actively and quickly taken a number of steps to provide financial support out to businesses that should be the first port of call. It should be, because the insurers that are out there are not banking institutions that are lending money, and I have to make that quite clear, because I'd refer back to my point around shareholder value and return. So there are a number of government financial aid schemes that we would be, I suppose, asking or guiding people to take advantage of first. But then when we come to those exceptional costs that are outside of the ordinary, that aren't necessarily driven by the volume metrics that we're seeing at the moment, but are just genuinely exceptional costs that need to be incurred because of the set of circumstances, then we are all ears, and that's a very productive and sensible conversation for us all to have.
Okay. Do you think technology will also have a considerable impact on this? I mean, we talked, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, about the increasing use of visio technology, not solely for validation, but perhaps things like, we've come back onto the site, a few things have changed, can have video in Neil's guys or one of your guys to help progress it. Do you think your supply chain's ready for that?
I think in parts. We've been, personally, I've been amazed at the amount of progress that we've made with a number of our partners over that kind of digital visit element. in a very short space of time. You know, I've taught fairly widely about achieving something in a couple of months that would normally have taken us a couple of years, and it's really focused that attention, which has been fantastic. But it's not an absolute, and it's a bit patchy in places, if I'm honest. I think that sort of creative thinking, though, about where you can afford not to be physically at the risk address, but still undertake some activity to progress the claim, I would actively encourage, because, you know, there's the kind of more obvious and tried and tested uses of desktoping or digital technology to support that validation process. But actually, you know, think in the context of a building claim or a longer term claim, that you need to have some periodic but regular reviews of what's happening on the ground. Traditionally, we would send people out to go and do that. Now, that I think is an alternative that we should look to actively pursue, because it's in everybody's interest to minimise that physical contact where it's possible to do so. But clearly, it's not going to be possible in repairing someone's house. You know, you need to have someone physically there to do it.
That's good. Thanks very much, Will, because I think that's going to be a big part of some of the transitions we can make. Nick, back to the liquidity, the financing and the cash flow. From a general view of a contractor, what are your hopes or concerns as you look forward?
I think, to be quite honest, on cash flow, insurers, again, have been absolutely fantastic in supporting us through the last 8 weeks. So payments direct from insurers have been virtually the next day. And they've just really pushed that, and that's been on their priorities. So again, that's been great to find them supporting and thinking of that. That really needs to continue, because I think we've gone through sort of like we've gone through a massive storm, and we're sort of in sort of like the quiet spot at the moment. And I think this is actually the most difficult time, because there's once everything really does start to open, you've got some massive investment to get everything moving again. When, as Will said, over the past 8 weeks, we've probably gone through all of our WIP, reduced it to a minimum, pushed as much through as possible. You're starting to hit this sort of dead zone where there's not an awful lot coming in. You've got less to invoice now, because we all have a sort of a time lag on WIP, but you're moving into that phase where we need work to carry on. I agree with Sean. I'd love to have an understanding around latent claims that's just sitting there, or some idea of volume, because we have no idea at all. So we don't know. It's quite hard to plan when you don't know. You know, as through the industry, there's massive talk of huge surges, but then there are other parts. Even insurers are saying, actually, is the surge going to happen? Don't know. It depends how they've dealt with claims. Have they cash settled most of those claims? And there's been sort of a mixed response in regards to FNOR response across the whole industry. So my concerns are actually getting, it's bizarre, isn't it? We're talking about dealing with a surge, say, but we also want to get the work in to be able to plan ahead and to have a basket of work to work from. And it is completely unknown. I totally agree, Alan. It's not, it's no answer. There is no answer at the moment.
There is no answer, and I think, you know, Will and others have been sharing that with us. Back to the financing, Sean, we have heard a lot about the guys come off insurance companies here and the release of it, but there was a lot of talk, I think, 2 weeks ago about some of the debt that had built up through third parties. And I've also received, there's a question on there, I think I've seen 2 questions on there and 1 question on there, saying that some of these third parties, some which are lost justice, etc., have actually furloughed staff, and they're concerned that that's going to make the ease of some of the more aged debt a little bit more difficult to break through. Are you finding that, or are you finding that it's not just insurers that are paying well, everybody else is as well?
Thanks for that question, Alan. Appreciate that. On the back of what Nick said earlier, I've got to be honest, our insurer direct clients have been absolutely superb. You know, But I just find that I'm going to give as diplomatic an answer as I possibly can. The more people that are involved in the chain, then that's where the age debt tends to come from. So if there tends to be adjusters or claims management companies involved, and there's more people need to sign things off to ensure you get paid, that's where the age debt tends to lie at the moment. I think our age debt with our insurer clients direct is, I wouldn't say non-existent, it's more than manageable. And support that they've given us throughout this, some of our other clients as well. We haven't got a major problem with it at the moment, but invoices obviously take a lot longer to come through the more people that are involved in that process.
Yeah, obviously cash flow is vital to every business. How are you finding that, Neil? Are you finding that you're still going to easily get the throughput of capital that will allow you to finance a restart?
Same as Sean, I need to be diplomatic, really, or not. I don't know. What I hoped during this period was that, realistically, our age debt would come down. And I was just looking at some of the questions as well, actually, because there seems to be a similar problem when there are generally third parties involved. Bear in mind, we're working, say, at half at the moment. It is a bit peculiar that our debt has significantly increased. And that is putting a strain on us. That's why I think I mentioned previously, most of us now taking pretty significant pay cuts to try and keep things going. And then, we've got suppliers chasing us. So you're trying to, negotiate with suppliers, which is utterly ludicrous because most of this, this is work, we've done the work, we're just owed the money. And it just seems to be stuck again. So as the others have said, direct, it is different. But yeah, third parties, we are struggling to get money in at the moment, and it will have a knock-on effect. That's it. It may not be a diplomatic answer, but that is the answer. We need, if we want to get the jobs up and running quickly, because we've got the capacity, clearing debt is still the quickest way we can get, you can persuade the suppliers. Because I said at the moment, the suppliers are saying, well, why, you can have to pay up front or something to make sure they can get the stuff to site, because they've got to run furlough staff and things like that. So it works its way all the way along the system.
It does indeed, and I think for those that listened last week, we had the fair discussion around how we might resolve this happening in the future. So yet again, that might be something that everybody works together on. That is a positive that comes out of this situation for future running. Last words, as we've approached the end, over to Will. Will, have you got any advice for the suppliers in terms of where you think the priority of work might be? Obviously, vulnerable jobs, people that are maybe in a alternative accommodation, and how to prepare to go back to work that might be kind of half done and half not, and how we deal with it.
I think the prioritisation order for me has been we've almost crossed one of these boundaries already, because with the people that we work with very regularly, we've had a really proactive approach to kind of, I would call it clearing the decks or housekeeping. So actually being able to submit final invoices for work that's been done, or to reach a sensible cash settlement decision for the end part of a claim with the customer to mean that people can get paid. So that feels like it's in fairly good shape. The next prioritisation bit for me, we've talked about it a little bit earlier, was we've got a number of customers that were caught up in the surges at the beginning of the year and even at the end of last year, that are still in quite a difficult set of circumstances. And, no one would have predicted what has happened, but those customers have suffered for long enough, I think. You've then got extended stays in alternative accommodation more generally. I talk about the total cost of ownership piece with insurers. That's a high prioritisation for us. And there will always be a wrapper around vulnerable customers. So whether that's in the whip that's been, I suppose, in place for the last couple of months or so, or whether it's from a new instructions point of view, we need to protect the most vulnerable within our society. I think the message for me about how do we find a way through this is, communication is often king in this set of circumstances. We're going to have to deal with a lot of unforeseen and difficult situations and have to react to them. And being able to talk through that, and being able to talk through particularly where you've got a number of different elements of the supply chain all working towards one goal of closing down a particular claim. We need to be aware of where that's not working properly from an insurer point of view. We need to understand where those pain points are quickly so that we can jump on them and react to them.
Well, thanks. I think you've articulated a lot of these situations particularly well today. And again, I'd say, you know, while we see so much of people asking insurers to understand suppliers, I think you've given us a really good insight to the stuff that suppliers need to understand about insurers to help guide everybody through this. Our time is up. We're slightly over it. Actually, it's the case. I'd like to thank some great contributions there. As we move through the next few weeks, we're going to extend things with our webinars and possibly into podcasts and stuff like that. So we'll be looking for different contributions. We want to keep the subjects alive because we're going in places that we've never been before. We've had some really valuable feedback, and I hope to continue to get that. So please, again, if you've got anything to say, it's alan@iloveclaims.com or any of the team. We have our weekly breakfast news going out. Again, contact myself or the team if you're not on the distribution for that. Let us know your thoughts. We will be available. Next week, we will continue the discussion. So any ideas you've got, anybody that you think might be of value, we've got a few panelists already lined up, but we're trying to be as flexible as I can. We'll update you with other panelists. We'll update you with a great range of the topics that actually matter to us as we go back. This is not about lecturing, as you've seen from the panelists today or heard. This is about people sharing ideas and trying to work out the best practice between each other. I think we've really got to continue to do that. So thanks again for joining us. Please continue to follow all the guidelines that we are given. Please keep all your colleagues, your teams, your families and yourselves very safe. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll be talking again in the not too distant future.